what is it about Godzilla that makes him so popular? Why has he lasted 70 years when so many other franchises have fallen by the wayside? I think it has something to do with the fact that Godzilla is just like us. In fact, he is us. You've probably heard that Godzilla is a metaphor for the destruction wrought by nuclear weapons, but that's not all. He's a metaphor for humanity itself in the context of the wider world. But we'll get to that soon enough. First, it's worth pausing for a moment to pay respects to the greatest monster ever made. When Godzilla took his first steps in 1954, I don't think that anyone, not even Toho, expected it to become the first of what would end up being one of the longest running film franchises in history. But in 2024, after more than 36 films, several shows, billions of dollars, one of the greatest scores in movie history, and one of the best songs ever recorded, the most famous on-screen monster is celebrating its 70th year. It's fitting that its anniversary comes on the heels of one of the finest Godzilla movies ever made, Godzilla Minus One. But I don't want to just talk about Minus One, which won a very well-deserved Academy Award. Godzilla is more than just Minus One. It's an institution. And I don't think that the long-lasting impact stems from being a giant monster, which is, by default, awesome. There are plenty of giant monsters, after all. But why does Godzilla, even more than King Kong, who preceded him by 21 years, loom so large in the public imagination? I mean, mad respect to King Kong, the eighth wonder of the world, but Godzilla is the most memorable giant monster, and there's a strong case to be made that he's the most memorable monster, bar none, even if you want to put him up against something like the Xenomorph, the Predator, or the Thing. Beyond that though, Godzilla is a cultural institution and is probably one of the most identifiable characters ever created. And not just in Japan either, but in America as well. The Zilla suffix has long entered popular vernacular in the United States and readily implies something monstrous or destructive. Godzilla was given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2004 to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Godzilla, and was in 1969's Godzilla Meets Bambi considered one of the best cartoons ever made. In the making of Jurassic Park, Steven Spielberg says, quote, "Godzilla, of course, was the most masterful of all the dinosaur movies because it made you believe it was really happening," end quote. Godzilla's creation would inspire a multitude of others as well. Reptilicus from Denmark, Gorgo from the United Kingdom, Yongari from South Korea, and Pulgasari from North Korea. As a sidebar, Kim Jong-il literally kidnapped a South Korean director and forced him to make this movie. But that's for another time. J.J. Abrams specifically cited Godzilla as the influence for Clover and Cloverfield, saying, quote, "We saw all these Godzilla toys and I thought we need our own American monster. And not like King Kong. King Kong's adorable. But I wanted something that was insane and intense," end quote. And those are just the movie inspirations. Comic books, video games, a hotel, theme park rides, music. There's not a facet of entertainment that Godzilla hasn't touched. And of course there's the roar. Besides the T-Rex from Jurassic Park, and MGM's Leo the Lion, Godzilla, in his many incarnations, has the most famous roar in film history. He's even the special resident and official tourism ambassador to the Shinjuku Ward of Tokyo. He's everywhere. So, again, why does Godzilla loom so large? Why is he so memorable? I think it's because of two things that I mentioned not long ago. Godzilla is not only humanity's responsibility writ large, but he's also humanity writ large. His motivations aren't dissimilar from ours if you really think about it, and we can get a sense of that by exploring his origin, his actions, and how he's changed over the years. Godzilla's origin changes depending on what movie we're talking about, but one thing that's common is that nuclear tests and weaponry is almost always involved. For example, when talking about 1954's Godzilla, Dr. Kyohei Yamane, portrayed by the legendary Takashi Shimura, describes Godzilla as being a prehistoric beast that's disturbed by the American hydrogen bomb tests. In 1998's Godzilla, he's a mutant hatched from an iguana egg that's been exposed to nuclear testing in French Polynesia. In 2014's Godzilla, he's the result of an existing creature that the military tries to kill with nuclear bombs disguised as nuclear tests, but that only serves to enhance him as he feeds off radiation. In 2023's Godzilla -1, he already exists as a dinosaur-like creature, but exposure to nuclear radiation has turned him into a giant atomic breath-blasting version of himself. No matter the case, Godzilla always comes back to the involvement of nuclear radiation. What does that mean for the character when contrasted with King Kong or others? It means that Godzilla, in his final form, is always a man-made creation. Godzilla isn't a naturally occurring creature in the context of these stories. Godzilla exists in one form, whether as a regular dinosaur-like beast or a sleeping giant, but contact with mankind through their most powerful weapons transforms it into what it becomes, a disaster unto itself, a walking nuclear arsenal. Without human interference, you cannot have Godzilla. Godzilla disallows any complaints of destruction because his havoc would not have been wrought were it not for humanity itself. It's humanity that summons Godzilla. He just doesn't appear out of thin air. One recurring saying about humanity, in different forms, is that we sow the seeds of our own destruction. The creation of nuclear weapons is an obvious example, but the use of forever chemicals, non-reusable energy, weaponization of biological agents, refusal to deal with hard issues, development of more efficient killing methods, and more are all different, haunting aspects of that which destroys us. Godzilla isn't just an other for us to fear. He's us reflected through a grotesque lens. When we see Godzilla, we shouldn't just see a giant lumbering beast. We should see our future taking revenge on our present. And that's a part of the reason that Godzilla is unstoppable and why he's been around for so long. It's because humanity's desire for more, better, bigger, greater is also unstoppable. As long as humanity exists, so does Godzilla, because no matter what, we can't help but do the things that awaken him, that summon him. But that's not all there is to it. Sure, Godzilla is created by us, but he also acts like us. Godzilla contains multitudes. It's a complex character, not dissimilar from humans in that regard. In fact, his motives are always clear. Godzilla virtually never acts without a reason to do so. Movies with people contain motivation, and often that motivation is to gain a sense of peace or safety. In Apollo 13, it's a desire to return home. In John Wick, it's to exact revenge and then return home. And in most superhero movies, it's to stop the bad guy and save home, planet Earth. And whenever they do achieve what they want, that sense of peace, people in the theater cheer. I've seen a lot of Godzilla movies in theaters over the years, and I'll say this. Whenever someone has cheered, they've almost always cheered for Godzilla. Because that's the thing about Godzilla. He never acts without motivation. In all cases, Godzilla is spurred to action because he is being threatened by humanity. I don't know about you, but I know I wouldn't like it if, out of nowhere, some dude started dropping bombs when we don't have any beef. I think this is relatable to Japan's attacks on Pearl Harbor, an event that spurred the United States into World War II. If you don't like that example, then the German sinking of the Lusitania, which provoked American entry into World War I, would also suffice, as will all unprovoked attacks. The attack on Pearl Harbor was unexpected. The United States had been supporting its allies through the Lend-Lease Act, but wasn't an active participant in the war. The fact is that the United States was a sleeping giant, and the world trembled when it was awakened. It's not dissimilar to how the world always trembles when Godzilla is awakened. Just as the US was justified in waging war against Japan, Godzilla is also justified in his attacks. Why do I say that? See, Godzilla begins movies as a third party. There's no reason to believe that Godzilla has attacked anyone prior to these events. Besides some villager folktales, as in the 1954 Godzilla, it's safe to say that he's not a threat to any government and a minimal threat to the people of Odo Island, some of whom don't even believe in his existence. Even Godzilla -1's Godzilla, perhaps the most violent, attacks because Japanese soldiers are using its territory as a repair station for their planes. How do you like it if some guys randomly commandeered your property for fixing up their planes? I mean, I'd probably have to suck it up because I can't exactly fight an army, but Godzilla certainly can. Even then though, Godzilla doesn't attack Japan. His attack is limited to Odo Island. It's not until the hydrogen bomb testing begins that Godzilla, a couple of years after the initial attack, finally makes his way to Japan. his first time doing so, as we've no reason to believe that the people there have encountered him before. When the bombs are being tested, it's safe to assume that Godzilla perceives them as a threat. His habitat has been intruded upon, if not destroyed, much like the United States was during Pearl Harbor. That means that Godzilla doesn't attack without reason. Rather, he has all the reason in the world. He has been attacked without cause, without provocation. Any body that is attacked is free to defend itself and not stop until it's assured of its own security. And just as a war doesn't end until one side surrenders or is destroyed, Godzilla won't stop until destroyed or until he's attained a satisfying victory against his threat. In this case, Godzilla is simply a metaphor for self-defense. He, like most people, will not act without provocation. He, like most people, should not be provoked because you never know what you're dealing with. In war, ignorance cannot be used as an excuse, and a lack of knowledge of Godzilla on the part of the provocateur is not a good enough reason to be able to avoid his wrath. Godzilla's actions as they pertain to attacking Japan or San Francisco or New York are wholly justified, at least from the point of view of Godzilla. Like any military, he's perceived countries or militaries as a threat and has set out to eliminate that threat. It's not dissimilar from what people do on a daily basis. When something is annoying us or threatening us, we aim to get rid of it however we can, because to not do so would be to endanger ourselves. In this, we're more akin to Godzilla than we would like to imagine. In fact, it's not too far to say that Godzilla is a sympathetic character. Godzilla, like us, defends itself. But Godzilla, like humanity, also has a significant capacity for change. This goes back to his nuclear origins. The thing about nuclear power is that its power can be used for the benefit of humanity as well as for destruction. The destruction angle is what most people think of, and for good reason. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were two of the most significant events of the 20th century and, combined, led to as many as 250,000 people being killed between them, including the initial impact and the subsequent fallout. Similarly, there are two sides to Godzilla. The first is the original. Godzilla the Destroyer, the Ravager, the Monster. This is the Godzilla of 1954, the Godzilla that was awakened by nuclear tests that had been going on and went on the warpath. But there's another side to Godzilla as well. The King of the Monsters, the Godzilla of the Showa era. This was Godzilla the Champion, the heroic monster that would fight Ghidorah, Gigan, Hedorah, and others, all in an effort to save the world. But even then, Godzilla, like nuclear energy, is not quite the epitome of safety. Even if he doesn't have his atomic breath trained on you, you would be wise to avoid his path. Similarly, when it comes to nuclear energy, in the context of a nuclear power plant, humanity needs to be careful. Chernobyl, the 3 Mile Island accident, and, of course, the disaster at the Fukushima nuclear power plant in 2011 all serve as reminders of how terribly things can go wrong when such power is involved. In 2014, Godzilla's enemy wasn't humanity, but the Mutos, a pair of monsters that thrived off of nuclear waste. In his effort to stop them, he ended up destroying swaths of Honolulu and San Francisco. Those cities represent the catastrophe that even ostensible help can cause. The destruction caused by one monster is stopped by another, but there's still plenty of destruction either way. Similarly, nuclear energy can be useful, but we need to be careful when disposing of the waste and taking care of the power plant. Otherwise, things can get out of hand very quickly. The thing about Godzilla and about nuclear weapons, and frankly about humans at war in general, is that the warpath isn't the only thing there is to worry about. It's the most immediate thing, to be sure, but jumping out of the frying pan means you've jumped into the fire. As I mentioned before, in the 2014 Godzilla, in an effort to stop the Mutos, Godzilla ends up destroying vast swaths of Honolulu and San Francisco. This is the conundrum of great power. It can be used to stop significant forces, but often with a tremendous amount of collateral damage. The cities that are destroyed by Godzilla in movies and by people at war with each other are the collateral damage, the things that need fixing in the immediate aftermath of the devastation. In the Battle of Evermore by Led Zeppelin, Robert Plant sings, quote, "The pain of war cannot exceed the woe of aftermath," end quote. Far be it from me to insinuate such a thing, but it does seem to be the case that the rebuilding and healing process will take far longer to complete than it took to prosecute the war, anywhere at that, and perhaps it would be even more severe. During war, your adrenaline would be high. You don't have time to take stock of what's going on. But after the war ends and some semblance of peace returns, one imagines that all the emotions and pain you had repressed through the war years would hit you all at once. There are those that lose their lives, those that lose their families and friends, their livelihoods, their homes, their communities, their sanity. But still they must rebuild, and even that is fraught with danger and trauma. There are still active landmines from World War I, meaning a war that was prosecuted more than 100 years ago is still killing people today. When Little Boy and Fat Man were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki respectively, their destruction was immediate. The bombs burst, and it was as though a star had fallen to Earth. Immediately, scores of people were killed. The lucky ones died immediately. The unlucky ones were in for hell. I'm going to read from the testimony of Akihiro Takahashi, who was 14 at the time and in line for school just under a mile away from the epicenter of Hiroshima. In this testimony, he describes the sight he saw immediately after the bomb went off. Quote, "I felt the city of Hiroshima had disappeared all of a sudden. Then I looked at myself and found my clothes had turned into rags due to the heat. I was probably burned at the back of the head, on my back, on both arms, and both legs. My skin was peeling and hanging like this. Automatically, I began to walk heading west because that was the direction of my home. After a while, I noticed somebody calling my name. I looked around and found a friend of mine who lived in my town and was studying at the same school. His name was Yamamoto. He was badly burnt just like myself. We walked toward the river, and on the way we saw many victims. I saw a man whose skin was completely peeled off the upper half of his body, and a woman whose eyeballs were sticking out. Her whole baby was bleeding. A mother and her baby were lying with a skin completely peeled off." End quote. That was the immediate destruction. But as we would learn, just because you were safe for the moment did not mean you were safe for certain, because then you had to deal with the fallout. Continuing from Takahashi's testimony, quote, "Yamamoto and Hata soon died from the acute radiation disease. The radiation corroded the bodies and killed them. I myself am still alive on this earth suffering after effect of the bomb. I have to see regularly an ear doctor, an eye doctor, a dermatologist, and a surgeon. I feel uneasy about my health every day. Further, on both of my hands, I have keloids. My injury was most serious on my right hand, and I used to have terrible keloids at right here. I had it removed by surgery in 1954, which enabled me to move my wrist a little bit like this. For my four fingers are fixed just like this, and my elbow is fixed at 120 degrees and doesn't move. The muscle and bones are attached to each other. Also, the fourth finger of my right hand doesn't have a normal nail. It has a black nail. A piece of glass, which was blown by the blast, stuck here and destroyed the cells at the base of the finger now. This is why a black nail continues to grow, and from now on too, it will continue to be black and never become normal." End quote. Takahashi died in November of 2011 at age 80. Godzilla, like the bombs, like humanity, is a 1-2 punch. The first punch is the immediate destruction, the second is the aftermath, and both are just as deadly. I think the reason that Godzilla resonates so much and so well with us is because he operates on so many different levels. Beyond the awe that Godzilla inspires, he's also a mirror held up to humanity. He's our hopes and fears of the atomic age. He's the warpath and the peace afterwards personified. Once his job is done, he leaves and lets the people get back to their lives, forever changed and with the knowledge that he might come back any day now for whatever reason if we're not careful. We can harness his power, but must be careful about doing so because any accident can be catastrophic. And we can't even be mad about it because he doesn't attack first. He waits to be attacked or for things to get out of whack, and only then does he show his face. Godzilla is the unstoppable force and the immovable object in one package, and that he's not unlike humanity, which has been evolving, growing, spreading, fighting, loving, destroying, and healing for millennia. Godzilla's been on the screen for 70 years now, but in reality, he's as old as humanity is, and his story will only end when ours ends. We'd be wise to make sure that that day never comes. A happy 70th to the greatest monster to ever grace the silver screen.